everybody. Okay, I cannot share the screen and I cannot claim myself as a host, so I guess I'm going to try and explain it without my slides and hope to take everybody along as best I can. So what is ITSA? What do we do? What are those standards that we're trying to set and build for DeFi and NFTs? So we're a German not-for-profit association based in Berlin with about 250 international members, and these range from corporates to startups, different token projects, exchanges, universities, a lot of law and tax firms actually that are also members. And all of them come together under our umbrella to promote and develop actively comprehensive market standards for DLT-based tokens and DAG-based tokens as well, to increase transparency and safety on these token markets. And we do it with 3 standardization projects: the International Token Identification Number, the ITC, the International Token Classification, and then both of these come together in our database. So some of those members do include some notable names. Big law firm that recently joined is DLA Piper. The MakerDAO is a member of ITSA, so that's coming from the space of DeFi. Nexo is also a member. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about the ITIN, so a token identification number, and what the use of that can be in the world of decentralized finance, and also the ITC and classification, what the point behind classifying token is according to categories, and what we can learn and take from it. So as far as the ITIN goes, the ITIN, you can imagine it's somewhat analogous to the ISIN that we already know. So it's a 9-digit alphanumeric identifier for tokens. It's extremely unique. So unlike token symbols that might differ across exchanges, and token names which differ across exchanges and are also importantly not unique, especially on decentralized exchanges, the ITIN is. So that's its key use case that we see in decentralized finance right now, is specifically on decentralized exchanges and bridges. Because I'm sure if everybody here has used the DEX before, you generally get the little warning that, hey, anybody can enter a token name on this exchange. Please check the token address to make sure you're switching for the correct token, or you're exchanging for the correct token. And that's right. I think for a lot of laymen, people new to the space, it's very difficult, and it's kind of hard to remember the token address. So it's like a separate thing that you have to go out and Google. And with the ITIN, this would become much easier. The other thing is the ITC, the International Token Classification Framework, which has currently 6 dimensions by which we can classify tokens according to their inherent characteristics. So every dimension will look at one key aspect of this token. For example, if we look at the first dimension, which is economic dimension, so economic purpose, we classify tokens by what their economic purpose is intended by the issuer. So is this token meant to be used as payment? Is it a utility token, or for us, is it an investment token? And then for payment tokens, we go a little bit deeper. We differentiate between unpegged and pegged payment tokens. So is this token like Bitcoin, right? It has kind of a free market determined value. It's not pegged to any currency that we know, versus something like Tether or any other stable coin that you know, which is pegged to a fiat currency or an asset in some cases as well, like Paxos Gold is pegged to gold in its price. We have utility tokens where we separate between those that are transactional and non-transactional. So something like Ether for us is a transactional utility token because it is used within, and it was intended to be used within its ecosystem to pay for fees and services within that ecosystem on the Ethereum network. Right? It was not intended originally to be used to pay for, I don't know, like the pizza example, like Bitcoin is a method of payment, and that's the typical thing. Somebody pays for their pizza in Bitcoin or something. This is not what Ether was intended for. It was intended to be used on its own network. So that's a transactional utility token. Non-transactional utility tokens are usually governance tokens. So to use the example of Maker again, their Maker governance token, right? Its utility only really exists within its own network, which is to be used in governance proposals there within the DAO. We then have investment tokens. So these are kind of what a lot of people call security tokens as well, tokenization of financial assets and instruments. And there we have separate categories for debt, equity, funds, derivative tokens, and we try to be aligned with the CFI, the classification of financial instruments there. So DAI, if I will just use Maker as an example throughout, DAI is a US dollar pegged payment token in its economic purpose, versus the Maker is a governance token, so utility token. The next dimension we look at is the issuer industry, where we have 35 different categories and subcategories to see which industry the issuer is coming from. And we've adjusted this, of course, to accommodate for new industry trends. So we have a bunch of industries specifically for decentralized finance. And there we separate within decentralized finance from decentralized exchanges, markets, and market makers, decentralized lending, saving, and asset management, decentralized derivatives, synthetic assets, and insurance, and decentralized data, oracles, and infrastructure. So to give an example for each, decentralized exchange and market making, Uniswap, decentralized lending protocol, saving and asset management, for example, Maker, or the Anchor protocol on Luna. Derivatives and synthetic assets would be synthetics, and then decentralized data, oracles, and infrastructure is where we would place Chainlink as part of their issuer industry. So for Maker, the DAI token for us actually has a separate industry to the Maker DAO governance token, where the DAI token is in the industry of payment services and infrastructure, versus Maker itself, as mentioned previously, is decentralized lending, saving, and asset management. Moving on, we have the technological setup. So we classify tokens according to which ledger they're running on, first of all, and also which application layer. So for example, is it a blockchain native or a DAG native token? And then if it's application layer, is it on Ethereum? Is it on Binance? Is it on Luna? Which ecosystem with which blockchain is it running on, and which standard does it follow? So is it ERC20? Is it ERC721? And so on. And then for Maker, both of the tokens they use are ERC20 tokens, right? The DAI as well as the Maker governance token. Then we have the legal claim. So is there any legal claim against a third party attached to this token? Do I have any rights as a token holder other than the right to the token itself? And most of the tokens we see today are no claim tokens, right? There's no real legal claims attached to this token. Most of the payment and utility tokens are in this regard. We have relative rights tokens. So some stable coins we could say are in there. If I have a right to redeem my stable coin for 1 unit of whichever currency it's pegged to, like in the case of Tether, we could argue, well, maybe you actually have a right against the Tether company that you can always redeem 1 USDT for 1 US dollar. And there's absolute rights tokens, which is a bit more forward-looking, which would be tokens that provide their holder with absolute rights, like tokenized intellectual property and other ownership rights would fall in this category for us. The other legal dimension we have is the issuer type. So the issuer behind this token, is there a legal entity behind the token? If yes, is it a public sector legal entity or a private sector legal entity? If no, so it's an entity without a legal personality, is it the distributed ledger protocol itself, like Bitcoin, or is it an application layer protocol on top of it? And so what's interesting there is that actually a lot of the tokens and a lot of the DeFi tokens we use, they do have a private sector legal entity behind it. A lot of times this is like the form of a foundation or something that's really pushing the development there, also hiring and paying people. And in most, or I think all jurisdictions, you need a legal entity in order to be able to do that. And then the final classification or the final dimension we have right now is the regulatory status. In the EU, according to the markets and crypto assets regulation proposal, right? So we wanted to incorporate this proposal into our system so that we can give an initial indication on how tokens could be classified in the future according to this regulatory dimension. So this is useful, well, on the one hand for regulators, because we show them, hey, look, this is your proposal, here's how it impacts the world of tokens, this is where they all fall in your categories. On the other hand, if you're someone issuing a token or looking at tokens, it's important to be aware of how regulation might change and how that might impact whatever you're doing in the field. And finally, we are extending the ITC currently. So this was version 1 with the 6 categories: economic purpose, industry, regulatory status, legal claim, issuer type, and technological setup. And we're adding maximum supply. So is it fixed, inflationary, deflationary, or discretionary? The mode of origination. So was this token originated in an airdrop, in a sale, as a reward, or some form of wrapping? Under what taxation regime does it fall? So that's following like OECD guidelines. Is it a conventional asset token or a new asset? Which is a very, very high level view because of course it's different in every country you go to. And then the consensus mechanism. So what kind of consensus mechanism is used to achieve consensus on the ledger on which the token is running? And from our past classification efforts, we've managed to get some, well, in my opinion, quite interesting statistics. Now keep in mind, these are statistics from the beginning of the year. So a lot of this will have changed, especially when we look at DeFi. But as I mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of private sector legal entities. So at the beginning of this year, around 80% of the top 200 tokens by market cap were issued by a private sector legal entity behind it. And again, this doesn't mean it's not decentralized. It just means, well, you know, there is somebody behind it that's pushing this, that's trying to develop it, that's trying to move forward. So I don't necessarily see this as something bad. Another 14% were application layer protocol tokens, and about 7-8% are distributed ledger protocols, so like native tokens, I guess. The other statistic we found cool is that over 80% of these top 200 tokens, according to our definition, are utility tokens, which is interesting when you consider that you know, the media usually covers only payment tokens, or often talks only about the payment uses of Bitcoin, especially, right? But actually, a big part of this ecosystem is utility oriented. The final statistic that we got from them, or I have one more actually after this as an add-on, but we found also that about 45% are ERC20 tokens, and 47% are blockchain native. So, and this is a statistic that I assume will have changed a lot in this year, but certainly at the beginning of this year, end of last year, I'm the co-host now, I can share. Okay, maybe I can show what I'm trying to explain to you in words. Second. So this is the statistic that I was just talking about, that about a year ago, people either decided between going to Ethereum or going fully native. And a lot of projects actually started on Ethereum as ERC20 with plans on their roadmap to then go native, launch their own blockchain. I think one of the biggest ones, of course, Binance, when they launched the Binance Smart Chain and Binance Chain. And only 8% was other. And it would be interesting to see how this develops with other smart contract platforms kind of on the rise. I mean, there's this eternal debate, L1, layer 2, alternative layer 1s is the future multi-chain, and so on. Yeah, and the final statistic is that, and I don't have a slide for this yet, unfortunately, is that back then, only 19.5% of the top 200 tokens were in the industry of decentralized finance. And that's like the one I would have expected to change the most. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to, before this talk, pulling the new statistic for now at the end of the year. But it's something that we're looking to publish quite soon as part of our research at ITSA to see, okay, how does this change year over year? What are the differences? And I think it might be helpful. I'm just going to go back through my slides just so I can show you what this framework looks like, to the one that I explained earlier with the classification. So there you have quite a nice overview of the different dimensions that we have right now. And in orange are the new ones that are coming. And you will also, if I go all the way back, see as an example, right? This is like the decentralized finance space that we have built up right now with an example underneath it and the different categories we have. And I think at this point, I am through with my presentation. I'd appreciate if you have any questions, any feedback, want to discuss a little bit what's going on. Feel free to raise your hand or just go for it. Joe, go for it.
Thanks, Max. It's really interesting. You know, I have a regulatory background myself and a legal background. working with Unit now. So there's a lot of interesting things you have to say there. And I guess the question that comes to mind is that do you think that these categories of, well, it seems like the regulatory structure is trying to catch up constantly, as you said, like it's the end of the year now. And we're just, what's a layer one, what's a DeFi, what's a different things. And just even by the end of the year, you're like, I have to update this data. So it seems like it's an evolving process of governments trying to go like, hey, we want to be able to classify things, whereas the market wasn't really saying, hey, you have to classify it. You can do it if you want to as an investor or as a user, for some market reason. But I don't know, do you think that these things these categories have become kind of muddled or maybe unnecessary if the market can kind of take over the traditional regulatory structure and need?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, the framework I showed, our framework, it's expandable. So we change it, we update it every year as well, right? Changing dimensions a little bit, adding new things. I think for regulators, it's difficult. They have to classify in some sense because that's really the only way you can figure out how you can regulate things. And then they have to decide maybe where can they use old regulations that's already been existing that could apply, and then to which tokens do they apply. They have to decide when they have to create completely new regulations, and in that case, which tokens do these apply to, which don't they apply to. So I definitely think that classification, that part is very important. Again, then you have to be important that you stay up to date and you need to catch up and need to figure it out. And I think from a market perspective, it's just helpful because it makes entry easier for new people. It means you don't have to read. I mean, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't understand a white paper if they read it. It's not the easiest thing as someone that's new to the space. So that's something that having a classification like this would make it easier, right? Makes it easier to understand what this token is, what are its key concepts, without having to go read the white paper, doing too much research yourself, or spending too much time yourself. It's like an easy starter. So that's where I think it should be important for the market to keep kind of onboarding more people, because we do want everybody to be involved, right? It's like one of the points and the visions of DeFi is to be open for everybody. So we need to make sure that we are open for everybody, and that the barriers to entry aren't too high for somebody that hasn't had anything to do with crypto. Maybe they're only getting on now. The ecosystem is bigger, so it's even harder now to get on. So we need more structure to allow people to learn easier. So I think there should be incentives on both sides to have some sort of classification, both from the market and the regulator's perspective. Philip, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Hi, I'm Philip. I joined ITSA like 2 weeks before, but I'm on the DeFi and NFT task force. So I have a question about the items and that stuff, because I'm not like 100% familiar with it on a European level. Because we have from Clearstream, I think, the organization from Deutsche Börse Group, like the old economy. They have like the WKN, Wertpapierkennungsnummer, and ISIN, I think. So do you think they will enter the market for those numbers for digital assets too? Because I know they are a member of ITSA. So do you think they have any interest, or any other European company, to do the same like ITSA?
Yeah, for the identifier, there's actually a number of other people doing it. So on the one hand, from London, we have e-trading software, and they've recently founded the Digital Token Identifier Foundation, and we're on a task force with them. We're on product advisory with them as well. But there's an ISO mandate, or there's, at least I think it's a draft for an ISO mandate. I'm not sure if it's fully through yet, for a digital token identifier for fungible tokens. So they're certainly entering the space with their identifier. There's us, which is for fungible and non-fungible tokens. So Clearstream isn't an ITSA member, but the German National Numbering Agency, so the German agency for giving out ISINs in the old world, they are a member, and they are interested as well. I'm fairly certain Bloomberg Kaiko, Fiji are also looking at this stuff. So yeah, I would expect the old world, the traditional world, to enter in some regard. But personally, I see them more on the side of identifying tokenized securities, financial instruments, those kind of things. It would be more difficult for them to enter DeFi just because the gap is still quite large. And you would need, I think, a more open source approach, because I don't think it's a community that would like to have a standard forced on them. Let's put it this way.
Okay, thank you.
How do you feel regulators could do better in supporting innovation? Question in the chat. That's a good question. I think what we've seen recently, well, in the last week in the US is quite good actually, with the Senate opening up to hear some kind of crypto CEOs and then see what they have to say about everything. And I think that's how they could do better. I feel like sometimes I wish there was more of an open ear. That's kind of all I want to say. But I personally am not in touch so much with the regulators. We're trying to get our standard adopted more so on the market side by showing the market the utility and the value we have in this classification and in the identifier. So if the market sees the use for it and uses it, and it's open source, it's free to get these identifiers from us, then we don't need the regulators to enforce it. Philip, again.
Yeah, because I am involved with the regulators and
Go for it.
The German and the European, the German government and the European Commission, and there's still a long way to go. But we saw in the coalition paper in Germany that they want to do a lot in the blockchain industry. The European Commission is working on a MiCA regulation, and there will be regulation European widely in the next year, and harmonization of crypto taxation. But before that, we will have a new crypto taxation next year in Germany. But I will talk about it shortly in my speaker session at 1:30, I think. So if you're interested in that, you can join my session. Yeah.
I would highly recommend it. Okay. Bunch more questions in the chat. So first, how different do you think the token standards will be in a year, in 2 years? How different do you think token standards will be in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years' time? From our side, it will change. I think the ITC will change the most, the classification, because we have to keep looking at where there's new trends emerging, if there's new, especially in DeFi, right? If there's new categories to add. So I think they would change only in the sense of being expanded. As far as the technological standards go, I'm not super involved in that, so I don't want to, like ERC20, ERC721, don't want to make any big predictions about that. Wolfgang made a point. Okay, there's another question to talk about. AG Euro, is it in main adoption now? What's the future of it? Will it be one of the stable coins out there? So we recently had like a brief look at AG Euro in an article that we wrote, which was kind of, but that was written by a colleague of mine. So I wasn't in the lead on that, but I think we saw, I mean, I think it's super interesting, and I could see it happening. Stable coins in general, I mean, there's a lot of innovation going on with stable coins, both, well, on the AG Euro side, also I'm very interested in what's going to happen with more algorithmic stable coins, magic internet money, abracadabra. Also the idea of, and then this isn't a stable coin, but the idea that we see with Olympus DAO and Wonderland and like its little spin-offs of creating like a full reserve currency independent, a decentralized reserve currency independent of the dollar standard, right? Backed by only crypto assets, backed by their and owning their own liquidity as well. I think that's super interesting, and also something that if we talk about adoption, I think regulation, that people need to be aware of, that there are these economic experiments maybe or initiatives happening that, well, I think have a lot of potential really. So yeah, if anybody is very interested in stable coins and CBDCs and so on, I would really recommend getting in touch with the Digital Euro Association, which were founded this year out of Frankfurt. They really are experts on the matter. So they're by Jonas Gross. You can approach them via LinkedIn. They're super open to talk and happy for anybody. What is your take on Terra Luna? I personally like it. I think I really enjoyed the recent CoinDesk interview by Do Kwon, so by their founder. Not because the interviewer was good, but I liked the way he responded to everything. He was asked a little bit about like US regulation and what he sees coming from that. So he just made some good points. I recommend everybody to check it out. I personally have quite a bit in an Anchor savings account. I think there's an interesting ecosystem being built there with Anchor, with Kujira, who's now building. There's a way to essentially bid on the Anchor liquidations on that collateral there as a normal user. There's a new protocol launching which will allow retail customers to also do like the seigniorage and the price arbitrage in order to keep UST more stable. So my take is it's really, really interesting, and I want to keep an eye on it. Of course, no financial advice, but I don't think I have to say that here. Do I think the UST APR of 20% is sustainable? How long can it stay at that level? I think it's sustainable as long as there's enough borrowers. So if we see the typical, like if let's say we see a bear market, people are starting to put their money either out or in stable coins. A lot more people are going to be depositing, so using the earn factor there as opposed to the borrow factor, and then I think we're probably going to see it come down. I don't know how long it's going to stay at the level it is right now.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I think we can kind of wrap this thing up. Sorry for being late. I was not sure that I was responsible for co-hosting the session, but here I am. Thank you very much, Bruckner. I will miss the first part of your talk, but I will watch the recording. It sounds kind of interesting. The next speaker here in line, I think, would be Michael. And if there are no further questions, yeah, thank you very much, Maximilian.
Thank you, Mark. No worries. And I've posted my email in the chat. If anybody has any follow-up questions, would like to find out more about what we're doing, feel free to send me an email. Cheers.